So this truck here we got in yesterday. I don't know too much about it other than it's got quarter-built suspension underneath it and Accuair management. We're tearing out the Accuair and throwing in Airlift and all new bags. So getting it up on the rack right now. I'm gonna start getting it all torn down, get all these parts on the bench and start throwing them in.
Hey, okay, let it be known. I'm working hard when I ain't on the phone. This ain't a home, this ain't a phone. I never stopping, I'm keeping it cold, unlocking the door.
Yeah, when I started, that's kind of all I did for a little bit was air installs. The furthest extent of air suspension that I had before I started here, and Seth knew that, was I put overload bags on the back of my truck at the time, my F-150. I know a lot more now than I obviously did when I started, so. So right now I just got the new Airlift tank thrown up in there, so I'm drilling some holes in the old mounts that he had for his last tank so that we can hang the new one. And then from there I'll start doing some new compressor mounts, new valve mount, and then just start getting everything plumbed up and wired up. So.
Do you ever feel like there's like a bunch of people watching? At least 12.
On a good day.
Yeah, I think there's at least 12 people watching on the used tubes. I don't know that I'm comfortable with that.
Does that make us YouTubers?
I think it makes us...
Should I tell my family that I've officially made it?
Yes, you're famous now.
Should I move to LA?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, move to Los Angeles.
Think Seth will still pay me?
No.
Oh man. That's the water trap. So it's got a little air to water filter in it, and then this right here is just a straighter valve to purge it. That'll blow all the water out. It doesn't stop water from getting in the tank. It stops the water from going into the valve. So this fitting right here will be your output into the valve. So that's all the air that goes through the valve and then out to your bag. You don't want water getting in your valve because that'll rust out the inside, and that's when you start having valves stick and stuff. It's because people aren't running water traps or aren't draining their water traps, or if they don't have a water trap, they're not draining their tank. So I'm not going to be using a lot of these. The Airlift system's pretty simple. We set up the water trap to go out to the valve, and then that's got a 3/8 push connect on it to go out to our valve. Then we are putting the 3/8 plug in this end, plug the top. That's typically the bottom. That's where you'd put like a petcock, a water drain for the tank, but we can't hang it that way, so it's gonna get plugged. I've got some street elbows. What these will be for is our compressor feeds into the tank. I'll have one of these here and one of these here, and our leader hoses from our compressors in the front will wrap around and we'll feed into them here, and then just 2 more plugs for these guys. Actually 3 more plugs, so I gotta go get 1 more. Jason and James actually showed me that blue Loctite trick, and it fucking works really well. They use that as the thread sealant instead of like a traditional, like people who use tape, like thread tape. It's, the thread tape, if you don't put it on right and you get it like past the threads, it'll just gum stuff up. The little piece will break off and get stuck in the valve or stuff like that. These fittings that come like pre-doped up, they're really nice. They don't really leak. Even those though, I like to, if they're permanent, I like to throw a little bit of Loctite on those too. It's just extra insurance. So you just want to make sure that you use an airline cutter so you get a nice straight cut. Pops in. Same thing with these. It looks like we're good. I don't see any real evident bubbles coming out of any of the fittings into the tank. It's still holding pressure. So she's holding there, so we'll pull off our little leak test fittings here and get it mounted in the truck.
Where do the compressors go?
They were in front of it, so he had them on those clamp style mounts. Pretty much just how it was before. I'll still do the valve right in the center. Just gotta figure out if I want these on the front or the back. I think I'm gonna spin the tank, hide them in the back. Either like this, or I'll probably flip them upside down to make the mount a little more low profile. So it'll sit just like this. I'll put the valve right in the center, and then these leader hoses will run back into those 90s we put in on the back side. These are the bigger ones.
Those are the bigger ones.
Yeah, but this is the smaller compressors, and then those are the larger compressors. So once the foot plate steps up, I think it's at 440s or 444s is where they step up. I think it's 440s. I think the tank is actually smaller now. I know it's smaller in outside diameter, but I think overall volume is smaller too. And two bigger compressors. So he should have a lot more air faster. He should still have plenty of volume in the tank to be able to get the truck up to ride height. But then if he messes with it, he's not gonna be dead sitting there waiting for it to charge up, yeah. We got the tank hung before lunch, got the holes drilled and just loosely hung. Went ahead and designed a compressor mount for him, just a simple plate. It's gonna weld up to the existing mounts where the old tank used to hang. So we got those cut out, drilled out, and marked out for the locations where those are gonna go. Just dropped the new tank out of the truck, that way we don't shower it with sparks. I'm gonna go ahead and get those compressor mounts. We'll get them tacked in. We'll set the compressors up in there, make sure everything looks all good. If it looks good, we'll get them full burned out. Seth wanted me to do a mount for these guys. So I'm gonna send him this one and see if he likes it like this, because you're gonna have to hang it. Like, you can't foot plate mount it with this style, because you've got your airlines underneath. You can't mount them upside down because they tell you can't. Why? They can't go past flat. Is it fucking RTV'd? Yeah, that would be why the V-band was stuck. They RTV'd the V-band. They like put sealant, like gasket material on the V-band. They don't need it. If you have to put that on there, your V-bands aren't lined up. It's on both sides? What the fuck? Well, whatever. More for me to have to clean up. Yeah, I really fucking jinxed myself on that one, Justin. All right, so came in this morning and got all the airlines ran for the truck, ran to the valve, routed those all nice and neat. And then after lunch, started getting everything wired up. So compressors are wired up, ECU's wired up. All right now I'm trying to finish up is getting ignition power from inside the cab, and then running our controller wire inside the cab. So I just finished drilling out a big old hole in the floor and grommeting that so that I can run those last two remaining wires up in there, connect the one, run the connector to the other, and then I should be able to test the system and throw some air in it and see if it holds a charge. So there was a smaller hole there before that he had his fuel sender wire running through. I liked the routing of it. It already went into the cab, so I chopped his sender wire so that I could drill a hole, the hole out bigger, and then I'll just reconnect his sender wire. So they'll all come up through there. The only reason that you have to run such a big hole is because your controller wire connects with a USB. So I just got to drill it out big to get that in there. If you cut this wire, it's like super, super small, like 3, 4, however many strand wire, and you're not getting it back together, yeah. So we'll leave those loose. I'm gonna drop it back down, drop that sender wire through the floor again. We can get that connected up, and then I'll get these tidied up, routed down here, and we can move into the cab, finish getting that ignition wired up. I need to talk to James or Seth and see what they want to do for a controller mount. We'll probably end up doing an underdash mount. Come on, man. You had all this time, you couldn't have put the fucking microphone on before I was over here?
No, I had to put it on when Justin gave it to me because the damn...
Oh, so it's Justin's fault.
Yeah, damn film crew, like,
God
here,
damn
wait,
media
hang on a minute.
guys. I got a camera, I'm gonna take my time.
Well, I gotta look good, man. I gotta get the makeup.
You skipped hair.
Yeah.
You just went straight to makeup?
I don't have hair.
So what I'm doing right now is I'm actually jacking the axle and compressing the suspension all the way. So I'm getting these shocks to bottom out. So what I did over here, I measured from a fixed point on the frame down to a couple different spots on this trailing arm. Yeah, that's what those measurements are. So there's marks on the inside of the frame and then marks down to there, just every so often down the trailing arm. And what that distance right there is, it's the distance from my mark to there. Now what I'm doing is, that was the suspension fully drooped, so I'm gonna fully bump the suspension now. I'm gonna air it out, and I'm gonna get the same measurements in the same places. That smaller number, that'll let me figure out the distance, the difference between the two, and that's the distance that arm's traveling, so that I know where on that arm that sensor needs to sit. Exactly, I'm getting a top to bottom suspension travel measurement in different spots, because that sensor, each one of those 3 holes has like a sweet spot of your suspension. It wants to see X to Y suspension travel. So you measure from a couple different points and it just gives you a better point of like, okay, it's 3 inches here, it's 4 inches here, it's 5 inches here. You can kind of go on where you want. So I might actually end up I'm not a huge fan of the angle that's on the sensor arm right now. They come with little Heims, little uniball ends, but you don't want to go past, I think it's like 15 degrees is what they say, but as straight as you can mount them is the best. Otherwise, as you start traveling your suspension, you're torquing that plastic arm. I'll get that sensor mounted up where I like it, because I've got enough travel at this position here to go in that second center hole. So I'll probably end up trimming this down so that I can mount the arm on top of the trailing arm, just like that, and just do a little sandwich tab or a little single shear tab. It doesn't see a ton of force, and that puts it pretty straight up and down. We'll get the sensor mounted and we'll see about getting a little tab made. So right now I am just clocking the sensor. You have the ability with these arms and these sensors to take these 3 screws out, and you can mount this whatever way you need to. The only thing that you have to do is make sure that this little arrow, the extruded part, no matter what orientation that you have this arm facing, that arrow's got to be pointing back towards the plug on the sensor so it can operate within its operable range. But like, if you wanted to mount the sensor this way, you can do that. You just have to make sure that that arrow is pointing up. If, like in my case, I wanted to flip it around from the way that it came factory, so I want it to mount this way in the vehicle now with this towards the back. So all I had to do is just make sure that I've got that extruded arrow pointing back towards the clip, towards the plug, with the arm in whatever orientation that I want it facing. The sensor only reads in a certain range, so if you spin that past it, it's not in its operating range at all. But luckily it's a really easy thing to do even on the car. You know, in certain spaces where you have a limited amount of space, you kind of have to mount that plug going a certain direction. In my case now, the way that I have it mounted is it would have been like this in the car, and I just didn't want to loop the harness and come back, so I flipped it so that it operates this way now. Okay. So that my harness, it just goes straight forward where it has to. I don't have to put a loop in it. Right. So just for aesthetics, but sometimes you have to run it a certain way to fit where it needs to go. But just basically you'll take that rod and go from here down to your suspension, and as your suspension cycles, that rod moves with it. So like air it all the way out right now, this arm would be all the way up, and then when you put air into the truck rises, the suspension gets further away. There's a different measurement range for your suspension, like the range of travel that your suspension has for each one of these. So like if your suspension has less travel in it in that spot, you're gonna have to go further in, because what it's gonna do, the leverage that you have on it, you'll get the same amount of angle out of this sensor by only moving a little bit. So from here to here, you're getting a huge amount of throw out of the arm, but it's barely moving. The further out you go to get that same rate of travel, that distance becomes a lot more. So the more suspension travel that you have, the further out you come with it, based on where you're able to mount it. The further out you get to, the more of an accurate reading you're gonna get, just because it's measuring over a further distance. If you're in here, it's twitchier, because it's like, you know, a little bit of suspension movement moves the sensor a lot. So you want to try and maximize the suspension travel that you're able to get into the sensor for it to work the best and level the best and the easiest that it can. Yeah, so like if I mounted it way up here, then I'm not gonna have a ton of suspension travel just because of how close to the pivot point I am.
Right.
So I would probably end up somewhere further in on the arm. But if I mounted the sensor way back here, obviously I'm way further from the pivot point. I'm gonna have a lot more measurable suspension travel, so I'm gonna end up further out on the sensor arm. That's why I'm measuring here, because it's gonna give me those distances, and I can see, okay, this is 2 3/4. That's the maximum range that the sensor can see in the first hole. It's like 1.5 to 2 3/4 of an inch before it maxes out the range that it's able to read. So if it goes too far, one, it's gonna overextend and you'll break the arm, or it'll like kink and you won't be able to come back down, or up rather. And if you don't have enough, it's gonna try and be leveling your suspension on only moving this much. And from here to here, you know, the sensor may barely move, but your suspension at the axle could move 5 inches. So you want to get the best, most full range of motion reading you can to get the best performance out of your system. Like anyone can install sensors, sure. It's just taking the time to go through and do them right. Because otherwise, there's not really a point in doing it, like you were saying. Like if you're gonna go through the process of and spend the money really to put your shit on E-level, and you just rush your sensor install, there's really not much of a point of doing the E-level. So I might end up, they had them up here before on these little standoffs. The arms were real short and reading right here, which I'm probably only getting about 2 inches of travel. I've got 1 7/8 here and 2 3/8 of an inch of travel here. So like I said, that 2 3/8 number is the max that I could go. So realistically that would work for here. But I'm gonna try and move the sensor further away on the arm to get a more accurate reading, basically.
Right.
So if I come back off this notch, I should be able to use even more of that suspension travel. It'll get me close to the muffler, but that's not too big of an issue. So I'm gonna throw myself another measurement, like right back here, that's about in line with that sensor arm, and we'll see how much suspension travel I have at this point in the arm, and see if I can get somewhere into like the 3.5 mark. That'll put me happy on the second hole in that sensor. So got everything all buttoned up, got the truck back on the ground, and got it hooked on a battery charger. Right now we're gonna go ahead and calibrate the sensors. It's only hitting it aired out and not laid out, so that means our rod could be too long too, those link arms. So if that's the case, then those can get shortened. You just cut the rod.
Oh, that's
so yeah, so both ends of it are just like a little heim joint. So there's just all thread running through the whole thing. Because it's not reaching its limit this way, it's reaching its limit when it's, it's not reaching its limit this way. It's reaching it aired out. Yeah.
90% of the time, I have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about.
So we're good with when the sensor is down, right? But it goes too far up. So we've got room to bring the arm down a little bit more, which we can do by making that arm shorter, and it won't let it push up as far. It's still gonna move the same, but it's just gonna change where it swings. So I found this sensor tool. So you can cycle through, you know, you can do the same thing, air it up and down, and it actually shows you the usable range in the sensor and then the range that you're traveling.
I thought that it,
Yeah.
so is it just over
so
traveling?
the rears are just going just past the limit when it airs out. So I'm gonna pivot the sensors a little bit, and then if I have to, I'll just shorten my arms. So it shouldn't be the biggest deal in the world, but the fronts are operating
I
fine.
was like, dude, I know you can see it somewhere.
That's the
They
first
got a
time
lot
I've
of
messed
shit
with it.
in
It's
there.
pretty cool. I like these controllers a lot. The rear sensors were, they were maxing out in one direction, so I just had to shorten the arms a little bit. They got that really hairy guy. I don't know why everyone likes him if he's so hairy.
So is this a 3P or this is a 3H? So it's still, well, I guess
Still just set your maxes and minimums, yeah. Because like, if it doesn't take, you know, airing all the way out to 0 to get the truck to lay all the way out, might as well just keep the air in the bag so you don't got to dump it back in.
So Dell does that. He sets his number 1 up as it laid out, but without all the air taken out of the bags.
Oh, okay.
That way, you know, normally on Accuair, when you want to hit like all the way aired out, you got to hold that button down.
Yeah.
So if you set that at number 1, you don't. You
That's
just hit
cool.
number 1 and airs out, and then boom, when you go to start it up and lift, it already has air.
Some air in it, yeah.
This faster, uses less air altogether. You just kind of lose the number 1 setting.
Your low ride height, yeah.
Really not that big a deal.
No. Say just like that, like it didn't take me fucking 5 tries to get it calibrated. Yeah, it's that easy. So we got the Patina C-10 all wrapped up suspension-wise today. Got the Airlift controller mounted on one of our underdash mounts, so little fold-away mount. When you get where you're going, you want to air it out, you can just flip it down. You got all your controls there, and then you're showing it. You don't want people to see it. Tuck it back up again. Got everything calibrated yesterday. Got his ride heights all confirmed this morning. Just kind of cleaned it up. So we've got it sitting at ride height right now for a leak test. We'll come in on Monday when the weekend's over and see if the compressors kick on or see if it's on the ground. If not, then it'll sit and wait until the brake parts get here, and then we'll start up on it again. He's got just his Wilwood manual brakes right now, and the way that he's got his brake lines coming out, they pretty much just run right into his fuel line. Stainless steel line on what I'm assuming to be an aluminum AN fitting. The longer that vibrates, one of those is going to win and put a hole in the other one. Either you're spraying brake fluid out and don't have brakes, or you're spraying fuel all over a hot motor. So either way, it's not good. Yeah.
So today I'm working on this 67 C-10, doing a few little things to it, squared up the cab, squared up the bed, everything was a little off here and there, so got everything square, got everything looking good, and then now I'm going to start doing the install of the Hydroboost on it for the brakes. The Hydroboost is the same as a regular vacuum booster, except as its name would imply, it uses hydraulic pressure instead of vacuum from the engine. About the same, except you're not taking, you're not having to rely on vacuum from the engine. Sometimes you know, sometimes with a vacuum setup, you'll have little issues here and there with supplying it what it needs when it needs it. So with this, you're getting constant pressure from the power steering system. You always have your boost there ready for the brakes whenever. So. The biggest reason for Hydroboost on this particular one is no room for a vacuum booster. So this is a much slimmer system. It's not as big round as a vacuum boost. So, you know, there's pros and cons to it depending on the application. In this case, it's mainly just room. He wants power brakes, and we don't have space to put a regular booster in there. So this is what he's going to have. All of us that have owned one of those have had our ups and downs with these. My 97 had about 300,000 miles on it when it finally started leaking, so you can't really complain too much.